So, good afternoon. Today we're going to have one of these videos. It's not going to be a very long video, but it is to inform and fill in the blanks, which we haven't presented in the other videos yet. In reference to these older 117 or 116s and 126s out there, and the issues you may find if you want to buy one, or if you have bought one and you're trying to get it into a running condition where you can actually drive it and enjoy it. And over the years now, these cars, they popped up, I would say 20 years ago, 25 years ago. You saw them at auto auctions, from insurance companies and repo, auctions and that sort of stuff. And they were mostly bought by dealers, the buy here, pay here kind of a dealer, who would put them, they would buy them for $1,000 and put them out for $5,000, $3,000, $5,000, $7,000 range. This was like in the early 2000s when that started to surface. And at that point, these cars, they had probably, I would say, maybe 50,000, 80,000, 100,000. Some of them may had 150,000 miles on it. And that was basically where those prices were at the time. Now, fast forward to today, this is now 22 years later. Many of those cars sat now somewhere in the country for an X amount of years. And people bought them. Now you find them mostly on Craigslist, and probably Facebook Marketplace are going to be more the places to pick these cars up in the price ranges from $500 probably to $2,500, $3,000. And they're like half runners, basically. So you don't have a fully running car, and you really don't know what you got with the few pictures looking at it. The video we're making here with Clay together in his car is one of those stories where he went out on Craigslist and he found that 450 SEL in Texas and had it shipped up here. He paid $1,500 for it. And the car is in a good condition because it has no rust. That is always a big plus. But, so like I said, since they sat now for quite some periods of times, and people may have worked on them, may not worked on them. The general rule of thumb is that someone tried to work on them. They did some work with them, trying to get them to run. They may either succeeded or they gave up in frustration. And you will pick up, or you can pick up these vehicles all across the country, whether it's the 190E, the smaller ones, or all the way up to the big ones, 450s, 500, 650, or 560s. And now, of course, the W140s too, they're about in the same category by now. And people, when people buy those cars, reviewers, they of course are interested in getting them to run. There is basically two alternatives, or three ways of doing this. The first one would be a complete restoration, where you take the entire car into every bits and piece there is, evaluate it, replace it, and everything else. That's a very lengthy and a very expensive undertaking. You can expect on a vehicle like this, if you do this, say like with the 450 SEL, and you do every detail of it, probably the cost without labor is about just parts cost. You're gonna look probably anywhere between $30,000 to $50,000. Then the secondary category would be people who do, say, like a partial restoration, partial overhaul. They may take out the engine, they may take out the transmission, or both, and rebuild them. Depending on the condition of this. And then the third group would be those who do what I call the running repair. And that is probably going to be the great majority, because even a repair on those cars, if you take the labor cost out, is rather expensive. What has complicated now everything in this, whether you do a complete restoration or the repair, or an engine or transmission overhaul is the availability of parts. And part of this has to do with the coronavirus. On the other hand, is Mercedes-Benz and other car manufacturers are slowly no longer making those parts on a larger scale, or buying them and putting them in stock on a larger scale, which means you have to wind up going through Mercedes-Benz Classic in our case, and they can get you a part. The metal parts for the chassis and everything else, they can be made fairly easy because they still have the forms. They will stamp them. They can make a custom part if it is not available on shelf. They can actually stamp this out of the sheet metal and then send this over here to the United States. Not cheap, but they do it. However, the bigger issue is now with these intricate parts which go on to the engine, for example, or in the transmission, O-rings, seals, that kind of stuff. Those are plastic, rubber parts, and those were supplied by third-party vendors, by OEMs, to Mercedes-Benz. And if they don't make a production run on them, then these parts are no longer available. And if Mercedes-Benz says that it's too expensive, say like they want to buy 50 parts, 50 pieces or 100 pieces and put them on the shelf, and the OEM comes back and says, well, you got to buy 2,000, but they want only 100, then they will get 100, but they will pay the 2,000 price, so each part is going to be very expensive. And so this has become the biggest challenge now. On my channel here, what I've seen over the last few months is that there is a lot more younger people now watching these videos. And that means that they are starting to pick up these cars. That is the age group, say like from 16 to 40. And a lot more now, the 16 to 25 years are watching this. So they're buying those cars, if you're one of those viewers, and they're finding themselves now in life, in a position in life where they're starting out, where you get your entry-level jobs and you're making money, but there's not a lot of money available. And this is now like one of the three categories we have as car collectors in the Mercedes-Benz world. You have the very wealthy category who goes out and buys fully restored vehicles. They want probably anywhere from $50,000 to $500,000 fully restored, depends on what model is and that kind of stuff. That is like the Jay Leno kind of league, collectors of the stuff, the ultra wealthy, very wealthy people. And those people genuinely probably do not watch these videos here. The next group is probably the more affluent, established, working, money-making person who has the necessary funds available in the bank account, and they go out and they do bigger repairs, overhauls, and they do usually then tend to rebuild engines, rebuild transmissions on those cars, and they dig into into money pretty deep. A full-blown engine repair, say like on that 4.5 liter engine, or on a 5.6, 5.0, or on any of these engine, can probably run you on a better part from $3,000, depending on how many parts you replace, up to about $10,000 without any labor, just the material cost in there. Depending if you get the Mercedes-Benz parts, if you can get them, or if you use L-ring parts or, aftermarket parts, and then save yourself some dollars on that. So that varies by taste. This is more like the perfectionists. They want everything right, and that there's nothing wrong with that. And then you have a other group of people, like I said, who are on a budget for this kind of stuff. And the process of how you go by to rebuild or get a car running who hasn't run or runs poorly is very different than if you just pull out the engine and the transmission and you start rebuilding at it, because in essence you're throwing money at it. The outcomes of both ways are going to be somewhat different. When you do a running repair, depending on the quality of the parts you put in, and on the parts you basically recycle, say like you're cleaning out your injectors, or what we're doing is, avoiding the head job and just getting the valves back to a sealing point where we can build up enough compression to actually start the engine, because the sealing is also important to create the vacuum we need in order to pull the plate down to get the fuel flow going. Um, those repairs can be done, but I would say you're probably going to be in a budget range at a bare minimum just to get the engine going, somewhere from $500 to $3,000 on those, depending on the fuel system, fuel pump, fuel filter, the accumulator in the back, the tank condition itself, the pipes, the fuel lines, basically, the fuel distributor, and on it goes. And then you have all the associated gaskets and O-rings and seals and valve, seals and this, that, and the other thing. That all adds up with the shipping, getting this stuff, and then the question is, can you get the part? Can you not get the part? Do you need all of the parts? Do you want to take shortcuts? Do you want to modify the system? And so far and so on. So on my car, what I did is I looked at it when I got the car. I didn't have to do any suspension work or steering, except for the steering. I needed the steering damper, and I replaced both of the tie rod ends. That was as far as it went. On the brakes on my car, I did only the brake discs in the front and new brake pads and a brake fluid flush. So that was like a $400 job for the brakes. Tie rod ends, damper was about $250 together. And otherwise, I haven't had any other work. I had to change the flex discs for my drivetrain. That was probably $100 or $75 for the two discs. And then I had to replace the drive shaft, which was $375 because I couldn't get it apart anymore to put new boots on there, which would have been enough. That was as far as what I had with steering and drivetrain related issues and that sort of stuff. On other cars, you may have to spend substantially more money on the steering and suspension because of the worn rubber parts. And that will leave you probably less money to do the engine work and the transmission or any other things. And so when you get the vehicle, you definitely want to do a budget on this, just a whole workup on this. How much do I have to spend on the fuel delivery system? How do my brake system, what does my brake system look like? How much money do I have to spend? Do I need a new brake booster? Do I need a new, or overhaul the main brake piston? What do you call it? The brake cylinder. Do I have to do the, brake calipers they need to be replaced? How are the brake lines and so far and so on? So each one of those cars will demand a different monetary, or have different monetary demands in order to get a vehicle back into a running and safe condition, roadworthy condition, to begin with. The great excitement is always, of course, when you get an engine to start up and you can drive it. The amount of money to be spent is what a lot of people underestimate. They say, like, you buy a car for $1,000 or $2,000. I would think your minimum budget, depending on the overall condition of these aforementioned systems, I would say probably a bottom number is $2,500, up to $5,000 or $7,500. In that range, this is probably what is necessary to do most of the work which needs to be done correctly. Back in the days, the places, these car dealerships like Buy Here, Pay Here, they used to have some back shop mechanic, and they were pretty good with it. They would just do the bare minimum so the customer was able to start the vehicle and drive out of the lot. And that was accomplished. So the rule was if they can go 5 blocks, then it's not our problem when it breaks down. And you have to take a look at this and see if you want to operate like one of these car dealerships, if you have the money. If not, then you can go that route, but you can expect that the vehicle is going to have issues. And you're going to probably not going to get the engine running very smoothly. You're going to have some vibration and shakes in it. The same goes with the steering. But the steering and, of course, brakes, you have to be very careful with the suspension in general because you're driving with it. So you want to make sure that this stuff is up to par to be on public roads. You don't want to be a hazard to yourself or other people, and that can easily happen on these old cars if you don't do this correctly. There's always people who will do shortcuts if they can get away with it, but on a Mercedes-Benz, a shortcut, from my experience, will always come back and bite you in the behind. And say like you put money into your suspension system, in the brakes, in the steering, and in the engine, and you do a little bit transmission work, and you spend five grand just on all of this stuff over some time. And then you neglected the starter and you didn't do anything with the AC compressor if that was still running, if it was running. Or you didn't look at the alternator. These are not very expensive parts, but that is something what people skip on. Now, a 40-year-old starter, which is the original starter, which came with a car, a 30-year-old starter, which has 100,000 miles on it, which was driven mostly in city traffic, is going to give out on you. So you spend $5,000 and you want to use the car as a daily driver, and you wind up driving to the store, and you can start the car anymore when you come out of the store because your 30-year-old, 40-year-old starter gave up. That is something which you have to also think about it, the auxiliary parts which go on there. And the most critical one is the starter power steering pump and the water pump and, the thermostat. People don't like to change the water pump, but they will change the thermostat, for instance. It's easier, takes less time, and we're going to run it until it fails. Well, if the engine overheats and you do it too long, you may blow the engine up. And the same goes for the alternator if your charging system is out. Now, the good part about, then you're going to have a problem. The good part about the alternator is that they have the replaceable brush assembly with voltage regulator built in, which you can get from Kent Brooksma, I think, for 28 or 35 bucks. And I got mine in the beginning of 2021, and this is working fine, and it hasn't worn down yet. And it has delivered exactly what it needed, and I got about 8,000 miles now on that part. So I can say this part definitely works. So that is not an expensive repair, but it will prevent the alternator from burning up and having other electrical issues so you don't get stranded on the road. That is basically the things you would have to look at in general. The videos we're making now with clay are probably mostly interesting to people who are on a budget, but if other, I don't want to say affluent, but the people who usually the perfectionist group who like to do everything right, they may want to watch this because they may can learn a couple things here and there too. And the big question in the repair really becomes, like with Clay's engine, is the determining factor. Do we have to pull the engine out? Is there really major issues there, like really badly worn pistons and piston sleeves and piston rings, or do the head needs to come off? This is kind of what you're trying to evaluate. With Clay's engine, we were lucky because he didn't blow the engine up with his non-firing spark plug he had and drowning the that cylinder number 3 or 4 was in fuel. The fuel destroyed the oil, basically, because it didn't go all the way out. Once you get a non-combustion in a cylinder, you're going to have fuel building up in there. and the fuel will immediately destroy the thin oil film on the sleeve, and that will seep then into the oil itself and will then kill, if you do this long enough, the entire oil in your system, that you have no more lubrication. And then it becomes, once it breaks down to that point where that oil basically is what he had in his car, what we found yesterday, if you run that engine, I would say another minute, 5 minutes, depending on the temperature, you're going to have at least one piston seize up, and this whole thing is going to go into bits and pieces. The issue with having unburned fuel in a cylinder is rather unique to any injected car, any car with injection systems. That is a problem whether you have an electronic injection with a pulsed injector, or if you have a continuous injection system. It makes no difference. Once there's no spark in an injection system, that cylinder will drown in fuel, and that fuel will contaminate the oil in your system. And the worst possible cause is a complete engine seizure, where the piston locks up because of a lack of oil lubrication. It goes into every corner of the engine. It will affect every part which has to be lubed, and it can get an extremely expensive repair. Now, if I was a perfectionist, when I told Clay that too, the engine would have to come out, and you would have to rebuild actually the engine to get the engine properly cleaned in an acid bath, and the head as well, to get any type of gasoline residue out. Now, again, we're at a budget here, and there's ways to work it around it. And perfectionists usually don't like this, and they look down on people like this. But it can be done. It is more time consuming, and you have to get a lot more oil, because you're basically starting to flush out the system without running the engine. No ignition, no fuel, just cranking and building up oil pressure. And then you have to drain the engine oil out after a few cranks and put fresh engine oil and a fresh filter in there. So that requires, like, I would say 2 to 3 gallons of thin oil. That in the synthetic oil works better in this case, because it absorbs the remaining gasoline better than synthetic oil. Synthetic oil does synthetic oil does not break down with oil. It has a higher resistance, so you want to use non-synthetic oil, like the Pennzoil 1030 or 5-weight 30, something like this, really light, so the your oil pump doesn't have to labor very much. So you can get this throughout and into the system properly in the end of the last corner. And then you have to crank this for 5 minutes, intermittently, build up the oil pressure, and then drain everything out immediately. And then you can do a second oil fill with this. And on that second oil fill, you can start the engine up and let it actually heat up to operating temperature, let it run, cool it down, and then you have to check the oil. If there's any type of residue of gasoline still in there, you have to do that oil change right there and then with another oil filter. And then you're going to have, after the third fill, then you're going to have enough oil or fresh oil, non-breakable oil in there in your system where you actually can start driving it. That is a workaround. It is usually not liked by professional car repair shops, because the amount of time involved in doing this, with a potential that the engine still has too much gasoline in there, and that you're gonna wind up with a seizing engine, with a locked up piston. That is a possibility until you know exactly what you're doing. So car repair shops, professional car repair shops, do not tend to do this. They will always tell you that the engine is basically junk, and you're either going to get a replacement engine, or you have to get that engine rebuilt at whatever cost, depending upon the damage the engine itself has sustained. Now, I looked at Clay's cylinders, and I looked at the pistons to see if there was any marks in there which indicated excessive wear or lockup, which is not the case. Also not on that cylinder, especially where the non-combustion happened with the bad spark plug. And we were able to get the engine lubricated enough already with the Marvel Mystery Oil, where the cylinders now freely move up and down, and you could see that even 60 or 80 psi was enough to actually push the piston down when we did the video yesterday. So that indicates that the piston movement is free and clear. We have no longer seized piston rings, and the surfaces of the pistons also look good. The sidewalls of the sleeves itself are okay, and that's why we said we're going to go ahead and fix this up. So the tool I'm using here is a cheap Wi-Fi bore scope I got off Amazon, and I think I bought that 2 years ago for like $25, and I can log on via Wi-Fi with my iPhone or from my laptop. On a laptop it is easier because I have a much larger screen. It is easier to see, and but I can do it on my phone, and this particular iCam, I think what they call it, has a recording utility, which I didn't know until yesterday. So yesterday we recorded this, what we did there with the valves, and I was able to go in there, and then you can actually see this better when you replay it, you know. And but I have used this now so many times that I know what I'm looking at. At the beginning it is confusing because it is upside down. The images are rotated by approximately 180 degrees, depending on how you're getting the camera in there. So this gives you an idea. It's better the diagnosis of a vehicle like this, from top to bottom, from front to end. It's better you will get an idea of how much money you probably will have to invest versus what you have available or what you can spare to do this kind of work. This is difficult to judge when you buy or you look at a vehicle unseen and you get it like through Craigslist, Facebook, eBay, those places, and you have it shipped to you. The vehicles, which I usually say like in the $10,000 plus category, they're usually in a better condition because someone else was most likely in there already and looked these cars over. That is usually the seller. Then in that price range, I would say $10,000 to $30,000 for these cars. They will be in a good drivable condition right from the moment when you get them. Anything that you acquire basically under $10,000 is more or less a hit and miss, and you will have to prepare a shopping list for those parts as well, for those cars to find out how much money you would have to invest. I did the same thing on my car, and the determination was after change of chain, but I didn't have to change the guide rails and that sort of stuff. And I still have to get my, the Woodruff key replaced on my right right camshaft. I'm probably going to postpone this until the car has another 20,000 miles or so. I have driven now since I did what I call the big repair, about 8,000 miles. I'm probably going to be by the end of the year at about 10,000 miles driving without any breakdowns since I did the repair. And this is what I wanted because I wanted a daily driver with no rust, which I got, and where everything is in working condition. And I spent probably, without the tools, somewhere between 10 to 15 grand on it, just so you get an idea of what I invested into the car. Between all the different parts, and I upgraded or I changed a lot of the electronic parts. Like I got the new ECU in there, I got the new ignition system in there, I bought a new EHA valve, I got a new rebuilt fuel distributor on there. And, all of these things added up, and the new valve body or throttle valve switch, and, these kind of things. All of this stuff added up over time, the drive shafts and everything else. It goes pretty quickly. $10,000 on a car like this, which had a sales price of $96,000 in 1989, is a drop in the bucket, just to get a form of the relation. There is a reality and there's wishful thinking. You cannot turn a rust bucket into a brand new vehicle, just keep that in mind with whatever you want to do. And your results may vary. Your car may run better than someone else's car because of the pre-existing conditions when you get it. We trying to cover as many things as we can in the videos, but in the end, we will have to see it is really unique to each particular vehicle and the condition it is in when you acquire it. And I think I covered everything. I know it was a long video. Usually only people who are really interested in this stuff, they will watch these videos here, especially this type where I just talk. But this is a sharing of knowledge, which I have, and you're privileged to it if you watch it. If you don't watch it, then you don't watch it. If you're looking for entertainment, this video probably is not for you. I would like to thank everyone for their likes and their comments, and for those who subscribe. And we will have more videos with Clay coming up. I just wanted to throw this into the mix here. You have a great afternoon.